Today we're going to look at John Bonham, one of my biggest influences, one of the hardest, most grooviest hitters I've ever listened to, and he really influenced my playing to want to emulate some of what he does just because it's so cool. So I really picked up a lot of techniques from him, so I wanted to bring those to you today so that you can maybe add a few of these to your bag of tricks. So if you ever try to play Zeppelin, you probably already know you need a really fast kick foot, if you will. And in this case, we're going to be doing double hits, and with a single pedal, that could be a little bit difficult if you don't have decent technique. So the idea behind this one is every time we're going to do a double kick after hitting a hi-hat. So it's kind of tricky when you put it in the context of a beat. For example, so that doesn't seem tricky, but when you start to put it in certain grooves, it could be a little fast sometimes, and it's hard to really make it seem right. So it's a fun thing to throw in, even if you're not playing Zeppelin, if you're just doing a straight beat and all of a sudden that comes in, it surprises people. Doing 3s and 6s as fills is huge if you're doing a straight beat and all of a sudden you launch into these 6s. Just changes the way the song feels a little bit for that moment. Going around the toms is fun doing that. Also doing long fills. That could be a lot of fun as well. So just do a straight beat, throw in those sextuplets, and all of a sudden, next thing you know, you feel like John Bonham. Sometimes I'll be watching a drummer and they'll go to do a fill, and their hi-hat stays completely still. That's totally fine. But what I really like to do is I like to add it, because it's kind of like adding a tambourine over it or something, and it's a good timekeeper for the rest of the band. So let's say I'm just doing any fill, adding this with it intensifies it, in my opinion. So it's just become a habit. Every time I do a fill now, I have to do that. Even if it's more of a complex fill, maybe you're doing the sextuplets like before. So even when I'm doing the beat, you'll see it happen, but when I do the fill, sometimes I'll double time it. One thing you can do instead of hitting the hi-hat is you can ride the crash, which is an awesome thing that I first heard with Zeppelin. I was pretty young, but I thought, why does it sound different on that beat? It sounded more open. So instead of going like this, he was going. Just has more intensity to it. Now, one thing that I didn't really realize until I started playing in some country bands is that you can also take that and hit it on the snare. So instead of going or whatever you're doing, just move that to the snare drum, but still hit with the other hand. Sounds like a train beat, sort of a country thing, but it can be used in different contexts as well. For fills, I love incorporating the hands and the feet. Sometimes just doing fills with the hands can be, I don't know, kind of boring after a while, so I love to get my kick drum in there. So a good way to start is to do the John Bonham 3s. So it's going to be tom-tom kick, tom-tom kick. That's huge, and then you can start adding the snare too on the first hit. So there's different ways to do that. And then if you really want to get crazy, you can actually cross your hands over. So you can go. And when you're playing a beat and you have to do that, it can be a little bit confusing but fun. It throws off the sound a little bit. He does a great job of that in Dazed and Confused Live. If you watch him, he's just going off and going crazy. So when you're playing certain beats and you want it to be more driving, sometimes you can just fit the kick drum in different places that normally you wouldn't go, okay? So let's say you're going like this. For a band like Zeppelin, sometimes that's not powerful enough, it's not driving enough, so I like to throw the kick in, he likes to throw the kick in as many spaces as possible. So I'm going to hit the kick everywhere I can except for when the snare is hitting. So that might seem like an obvious thing or seem easy, but when you get going at certain speeds, it can be pretty difficult with one foot. You're going to think, oh, this would be easier with double kick. But really get that single foot fast and you should be able to play a lot of Zeppelin stuff. If you decide to hit the kick drum 1/16th note after the snare, you get what I call the gallop kick sound, and it's used a lot. You'll hear it in a lot of Zeppelin beats. But just start off simple, do a regular beat and then hit that kick drum right after the snare. Now, if you start to make it more complex, you get more like this. Hear the gallop sound there? So it wouldn't be the same without that 16th note right after the snare. It would be. So you got to add that little 16th note after the fact. A basic jazz swing beat, but as a rock drummer, this could be new to you. And that's where you use the ride cymbal, go ahead and use the foot on the hi-hat to get this feel. Okay, that's your first priority. And then go ahead and do a cross stick by grabbing the drumstick and hitting the side of the rim and the top of the head with your hand, open a little bit like that. And then we're gonna add the toms as well. So if you're new to this, this could feel very strange. If you played jazz before, you're gonna sort of just breeze through this, but it would be like this. So that's first, then add a couple tom hits. And if you want to, you can even feather the kick drum a little bit. Okay, don't give it a real pounding. Just go ahead and sort of, for now, just let it ride every beat. All right, you have to be able to master ghost notes on the snare. And ghost notes are where you barely tap in between the groove. And the way it was taught to me, here's the instructional part a little bit, is if you wanted to go like this with your hand, you can learn how to do ghost notes. So we're going to go right, left, and then we're going to bring the right hand over to hit the accent and then come back. So check this out. Add the kick. I remember watching some VHS drum video, and that's how I began to learn ghost notes. Then you get better and you can start to do it all with the left hand, okay? I'm talking strictly from a right-handed player. So if you start to do that, even with the simplest grooves and adding a couple of those ghost notes, it really makes a difference in the groove. So let's make it really obvious there so you could really hear it. It probably wouldn't be that hard if I was actually playing in the studio. Without it though, here's what it would sound like. It just doesn't have the same feel. So make sure you work on just the basic concept like I was talking about before, and then try to add it in regular beats. Be very subtle, but it can add a lot. So don't forget about the ride cymbal. You have the main part, but you also have the bell, which is much more powerful sometimes. Especially if you like to hit it like he does, not with the tip, but with the side of the stick, you get a much bigger tone, okay? So just mess with that a little bit. Sometimes it's good to punctuate the end of a phrase with it, just to be more musical as a drummer. You could use it in full beats and just change to get a difference in sound. Check this out. So I love how much that adds to it. Now, like I said, you could punctuate the end of a part with it. You could be like, If you don't know how to do a rim shot, you're going to want to learn for Zeppelin tunes, okay? So if I just hit the tip of the stick on the head, sounds like that. If you start to add the side of the stick hitting the rim, right here at the bottom, towards the bottom, as you hit the top of the head, you get a thicker sound. It's more of a mid-range pop sound, like a poppy sound, not pop like the music, but it has a pop to it. Hear the difference? Versus, okay, it's a lot stronger. So if you do a beat and you try to compare the two, you can really hear the difference. The first part, I'm going to just do the regular snare hit, and then I'm going to add the rim shot afterwards. So don't neglect the rim, because it's really going to push your beats to a new level because of the power that it adds. And don't discount the most basic stuff when it comes to drumming. For example, if you were to do a fill and you just went, just something kind of basic, It's a lot cooler if you can add a quick double with your left hand, and this is what I see him do quite a bit. So just that little is huge. You could also use that in crashes. So get really good at your doubles. I like to do the drop grab technique. You can find that on YouTube. I think Gordy Knutson teaches it. But whenever I'm doing some kind of fill, I love to start it off with that. It's sort of like one better than a flam. So instead of just going like a flam, you're going, and it gives it a little extra hit. It's that kind of a sound. Okay, the beginning of rock and roll taught me two techniques. One is how to sync my hands up together, because doing this can actually be pretty tough. Anytime you have to hit both hands at any type of speed, especially when you have to use different dynamics for this intro. So just start off by going. Try to get faster and faster until you can, until you find where you fall off, and then go back, slow it down, slowly raise it up again, use a metronome if you want to. For the beginning of rock and roll, you get this kind of a thing going on with actual accenting. So that could be a little bit challenging. That wasn't full speed yet either, but I wanted to show you that your hands have to lock together first until you go full speed. The second part of the technique on that, this is what I consider another technique, is an audio illusion in this song. And I was getting this wrong for many years, trying to play the beginning to rock and roll, but it depends how you count it. So if you come in on the and of 3, instead of thinking of it as coming in on the 1, which it sounds like I said, audio illusion, it changes the whole ball game. So check this out. I'll count it while I hit the hi-hat this time. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 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 3, and 4, and... That's hard to do. It takes a lot of brain power. But once you understand that concept, the whole band can come in on the 1 finally. Sometimes you see a band play that and everyone's looking at the drummer waiting for a cue, but it's all in the counting. So coming in on something other than the 1 is the musical technique. It's not necessarily a drumming technique. Like I said before, I love using the toms on my feet for drum fills, and this one's no different. This one's more of a quick little grouping. And it's basically just snare, tom-tom, kick. But it's not continuous like that. It's actually done real fast in a clump. And the best part of this is if you watch your right hand as you do it, it's doing this great sweeping motion that you might not even be able to do if you just tried to do that on its own. But when you put it in the context of the fill, it seems to just lock together. So to fit this into any kind of beat, sometimes you have to compensate. I'd be interested to see how you guys find ways of fitting this in. But Stairway to Heaven is more of a type thing. And doing those 2 hits beforehand gets you back on the beat. But I like to challenge myself and just throw it in wherever I can and see if I can work my way out of it. Speaking of working your way out of things, sometimes hitting on the E of a beat can be fun. If it's a straight beat, 1 E and a 2 E and a 1. That's kind of weird. Like if you're waiting to come in, but you don't come in on the 1, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. That can actually be pretty cool. If you're doing it more in a swing type feel, you get this, which I love this kind of concept. 1, 2, 3, 4. You get sort of a falling over sensation, and like I said before, you got to work your way out of it once you come in on a strange beat. All right, try displacing the snare for an added groove, for a different type of groove. If you just sometimes do straight grooves where the snare hits predictably, it could be a little bit boring. For example, but if you just displace the snare a little bit, even just the first one, you get this. So So a whole new groove just by moving the snare back a little bit. And I wasn't even aware of this technique when I first heard it. It was from John Bonham. But I love the idea of hitting the open hi-hat as you do a kick drum, because as a drummer, your feet have to go like this. They have to exchange. And then you have to close it. So it creates a different kind of sound than just going, which is what I was used to doing, closing both feet at the same time. So you get this instead. You could use it in different situations too, like if you're doing a fill. Kind of interesting. You feel all twisted up when you're doing it. Now let's take a kind of complicated kick drum and let's make it even crazier by going 16th notes with the hands. It's always fun to do. So let's say you're used to going something like that. Now go ahead and do the 16th notes back and forth, right, left, and still hit the snare drum with the right hand. You get something like this. Whenever I do fills on the drums, sometimes I don't like going out and hitting toms and doing something separate from the groove so much. So what I like are beat fills, and John Bonham does this all the time. And that's where you would throw something in that's kind of like a beat, but it just throws it off enough to feel like a fill, if you will. So even something as simple as just throwing that in really quick to a beat could be interesting, yet keep you locked in the pocket. So you could go like this. Great way to change things up without changing things up too much. Now hitting the kick on all the up beats, I like to say up beats because I think of down, up when I drum. So if you're counting like eighth notes, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 16th notes are a little more complicated, 1 E and 2 E and Well, if you can hit a kick for that, it gives you a different type of feel, even if it's just for a second. If you do something like this, that's really strange, and of course he uses that brilliantly in Ramble On. And I love leaving space during a groove to really open up the importance of certain hits. In this case, the snare. Watch this. So because you do the quick double kick and then there's space, that snare hit is so epic. Now I'm so used to doing fills with right hand dominance because I'm right-handed, so I do something like. But once in a while it's fun to let the left hand hit in a more dominant fashion. You end up with this kind of thing. So you get a lot of those upbeats, but with the left hand now. Versus something like. So it's just another way to throw off things that you normally do just to get a different look. Okay, if you've ever tried to hit the kick drum 3 times in a row with a single kick, that could be a little bit difficult, but work up to it, and here's a good little exercise to do that. Let's go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, snare, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, snare, and add the hi-hat, slow down, then slowly speed up, and you'll start to get a feel for hitting threes in the pocket. So that'd be like the more slowed down version of it. If you slowly sped it up now to a different level, you'd get. Okay, the last thing we're going to look at is probably the most important thing. It's the reason why I took drum lessons when I was younger. The most important thing to me, and that was playing the shuffle that he plays. And if you didn't do the ghost notes like we talked about earlier, you'd get something like this. But now, if you just drop in those ghost notes in between, I'm going to do a whole lesson on this on the site, but you get a much more interesting sound. So I worked so hard on this beat. One time I think I played it for 6 hours straight just because I wasn't getting it. And I finally started to understand the mechanics of it. The hands alone are very strange. Watch. And the weirdest part is after you hit the accent, you actually have to hit a ghost note right after. So I was not used to that. So it's something we're going to get way into in the lesson when we do the drum program. But for now, just realize that that's an awesome, fun beat. It's used in different contexts and different bands. You may have heard it like... It's more like boss gigs type stuff. Or... And that would be the Rosanna beat. So I love shuffles. We're going to get way deep into them, like I said. But for right now, I just wanted to show you one of the most important beats in my life. All right, guys, that was the John Bonham Technique series. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Once again, huge influence in my life. There's probably 5 drummers that I emulate the most when I first started until I started finding my own sound, but he was one of them. So we might do some more videos on other drummers, but for right now, that'll be it. And let's go back to guitar lessons for a while on this channel. But thanks for watching, and we'll catch you soon. Thanks.